Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the sophomore album from Harry Styles called Fine Line. I remember the hype behind Harry Styles' self-titled album in 2017. I remember the grandeur that kicked things into gear with Sign of the Times, the sort of statement of purpose song that was defiantly retro, but also kind of timeless. Few pop acts in today's day and age dare to introduce themselves with such presence. It blew apart any preconceptions of what One Direction's solo projects could be after the relative disappointment of Zayn, really sets a level of quality. And while I was significantly cooler on Harry Styles' album as a whole and his brand of soft rock, even more so when Niall Horan showed up several months later to deliver way more tightness and better written compositions overall on his debut, Flicker, but Harry Styles at least had the charisma and the songwriting chops to be a legit pop star, where most of his peers are just ordinary people trying to make pop music. Yeah, shamelessly retro, little inconsistent overall, especially in the writing, sure, but he made it work for him. It was a good album. And I'll be blunt, I haven't been anywhere near as impressed with this project's rollout. For all the hype that Harry Styles is trying to cultivate, that he was being more experimental and embracing more sounds and styles both in the past and now, he's referenced David Bowie in his promotion, which smacks of reading and believing some of his own press junket. But the singles have just felt underproduced and not all that well written. Certainly nothing with the sort of lyrical ambition or scope that he had once promised. Maybe I just had to reset my expectations, I don't know. I'll freely admit that one of the reasons why Niall Horan is so consistently impress me is because I don't expect that much out of him. But at the same time, the scene is open for Harry Styles to go big, be a pop star, provided the songs hit and were well composed. That being said, maybe it's to his benefit I had some lower expectations on Fine Line, so alright, what did we get? You know, some of y'all have been noticing that seemingly my tagline in 2019 is that I've been underwhelmed by a lot of albums. And yeah, I really hate to admit it, but it's just as true with Fine Line. Not that it's bad, but in comparison with the self-titled project that had the confidence and flair of a legit pop star looking to shake the landscape in the mainstream and establish himself, this winds up feeling like a sophomore slump on sheer lack of energy and experimentation alone. And when you consider how Harry Styles was advertising and promoting this, to get an oddly inert, backwards-looking album that still has some of that scale and ambition to sound a bit bigger, it had the potential, I can hear it. It's hard not to see a project that never quite goes as big as it could. A sunflower that's curling away from the sun instead of embracing the light and heat to really bloom. But let's start off with Harry Styles himself, and I want to be careful in how I describe this, because on some level, he is pushing himself emotionally into more vulnerable territory than on the self-titled album. He's always had a lot of expressive charisma, but to pull forth more than just raw confidence or the curdled regret and anger of that album's best songs, that could be different, especially given some of the subject matter. It's a little bit more personal. I do respect that he's leaning into his upper register and occasionally questionable falsetto in order to sell some softer, more introspective material. Not really my thing, but I respect it. But it's also considerable risk, because not only does it draw more attention than he's probably expecting to the writing, more on this in a bit, but it also requires a different sort of production and layering than the rougher firepower he was previously leveraging, especially considering how blatant some of his sonic influences are. I mentioned on Billboard Breakdown before that some of this also comes through some questionably placed backing vocals that are weirdly sharp or lacking greater dynamics within the harmonies, but it also comes with layering that just does not have the careful blending it should between the verses and the hooks. They don't quite feel as well placed as they should. Maybe that's just trying to accentuate the rough, buried just below the surface unease of the situation as a whole on the album. I can certainly imagine that's kind of the case given how it seems like any electric guitar smolder is smothered at the very back of the mix. But when Harry Styles doesn't really vary his delivery enough to hit the expressive heights that he could, that he's shown he can in the past, well, he's stuck competing in a more reserved 70s singer-songwriter lane, and I'll be blunt, he's no Father John Misty here. Actually, in fact, I think we kind of have to talk about some of those influences right now, or they're just going to overshadow the entire review, because for as much as Harry Styles has referenced David Bowie's experimentation in his interviews, he's always idolized acts closer to 70s AM soft rock like Fleetwood Mac, and man, it shows. Now, on some level, this isn't a bad thing. I love Fleetwood Mac too, and I can certainly admire how much Harry Styles is trying to place his production style in this territory through layers of acoustic pickups, well-defined bass lines, and flourishes of other instrumentation. And there's even cuts where might even draw some parallels to the softer funk of Michael McDonald on other slices of early 80s soft rock like on Adore You. And you can certainly see some of the more interesting elements in the composition to draw that parallel. But here's the problem. If you're looking for Harry Styles to build on that foundational sound, show the rock-solid fundamentals like Niall Horan did, or even the level of weirdness that Fleetwood Mac would indulge in that era, look, you're going to be left wanting, both on a musical and lyrical level. I've already mentioned how much of the textured firepower off the electric guitars is just buried, but it seems like at multiple points, Harry Styles was presented with the opportunity to make these songs seem more dynamic or interesting, but it just does not deliver that sort of swell or punch. The opening track, Golden, good driving song thanks to the quicker bass line, but I was waiting for the gleaming warmth to really explode off those acoustic spikes, but he only really ramps up his intensity for the final hook, and the instrumental never really builds. You get a similar build-up on Cherry with harmonicas and pipes with a promising crescendo, but it never really opens up further. Similar case for the non-payoff of Lights Up, which has always kind of felt like an interlude. Then you get tracks like She in the closing title track, where Harry Styles just lets his backing band blast away with a guitar solo and arranged elements. But in the former case, the fuzz guitar solo just feels increasingly tinny and anonymous, and in the latter case, the foundation never builds up significant heft to pay off that crescendo and explosion. Then there are songs like Canyon Moon that, sure, sounds like it could accurately imitate Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and I like that sound, but it never feels like it moves beyond just being a really pleasant imitation. And there are the moments that lean into a retro schmaltzy side of that era that's probably best left forgotten, like the plinking guitar lele that sounds kind of uncomfortable adjacent to the cello on To Be So Lonely, or the female vocals plays opposite the pianos on Treat People With Kindness that sound imported from a really bad off-Broadway 70s musical. I get it's trying to lean into the cheesiness, but it's where not going over the top really kind of hurts it, just kind of doesn't kick in the way it should. The absolute worst moment comes through on Sunflower Volume 6 though, which sounds like this spongy yacht rock with gurgling progressions and an utterly gross guitar pickup. If this is Harry Styles stepping out of his comfort zone, someone should have informed him there were parts of the 70s that were best left forgotten, and this is one part of it. But that tentative lack of greater payoff, it also translates to the content as well, and it's also where I think it's worthwhile talking a little bit about Rumors, Fleetwood Mac's tumultuous classic to which Harry Styles is clearly drawing forth a lot of influence in chord progressions, production, and themes. But while Rumors is celebrated as a soft rock classic thanks to killer songs and the seeming universality of the songwriting, one word I would never use to describe it is mature. Self-aware, sure, as the greatest tension came from the internal relationships that were in mid-collapse, held together on uneasy chemistry and a lot of bodily fluids, but with the knowledge that they couldn't possibly expose the nightmare behind the scenes where they were expected to be better, and this was before the tabloid era, everyone knew the drama. But the greatest release came from throwing caution to the winds and airing out all the emotional truths, even though it was asking for that disaster. That's what makes the album so brilliant. And yet, even though Harry Styles is embracing a similar breakup arc, creating the subconscious comparison in the sound, and you can hear some of the underlying unstable emotions that we know he's capable of selling thanks to the last album, Fine Line never really goes there. And not only does that impact the broad lack of musical catharsis, for a project that's trying to emphasize its vulnerability, it winds up feeling all the more closed off. Take a song like Cherry, addressed at his last ex, and you can tell the underlying pain and hurt is spurring on some of the pettiness in the lyrics, but not only does the framing kind of feel wonky with that low-key instrumental, it also feels like it's pulling all of its punches, which isn't really a dramatic arc that he hits so many similar notes on To Be So Lonely. And while, of course, he can feel intensely self-critical, the fact that I'm not hearing any deeper insight into who he is, or the assertions like that, and why he's like that, it kind of gets distracting. You need to go there, especially when I'm still left with the feeling that many of these songs feel kind of underwritten, hammering one-liner cadence without a lot of greater development or insight. As I said, going low-key naturally draws more attention to the songwriting, and while I can appreciate the smaller, wistful moments on Canyon Moon, or the slow, lingering Gangsta Falling, or even just the more straightforward love songs like Adore You that's pretty good, there are places where his attempts at sensitivity hits unintentional sour notes that don't quite align with some of those bottled up emotions that he wants to emphasize. Take She, which has a good concept of Harry Styles having an idea of the woman that he wants to be with, but no clear idea where to find her, and yet I'm cynical enough to notice that said girl that he's imagining is always stuck unloved in a relationship with someone else. Or how on the title track we get lines like, "Spreading you open is the only way of knowing you." Out of place sexual innuendo aside, where's the deeper reflection on those sentiments? I kind of think that might be more interesting. But when you factor in some of the questionable sequencing and the placement of the love songs on this project, production that I'm left thinking should sound either more lush or more jagged and direct, and a few too many compressed warping layers that try to add some bleary-eyed psychedelia, because apparently he was on mushrooms when he did a couple of these songs, and yet they don't really match with anything or really fit with any sort of themes. Look, I'm just not all that impressed. Again, this is a project that feels a lot smaller and safer than the self-titled album, with a sound that's more pastiche than actual innovation, without sharper writing to justify the restrained presentation, and a few too many muddy stabs at pathos without developing more of an identity. That doesn't mean it's not generally pleasant. I'm a sucker for this sort of 70s AM soft rock sound as much as the average music critic, but it also means I'm just as familiar with when it goes awry, which is why I'm giving it an extremely light 6 out of 10 and mostly just a recommendation for the fans. Otherwise, look folks, Rumors isn't going anywhere else, and you know what, until Harry Styles is really willing to cut loose, establish more of a unique identity that's beyond just retro pastiche, I don't know folks, I might just stick with that. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can only imagine this is going to be received very well by all of you, but hey, if you want to buy or stream the album, links down there below, and I got the poll up there for y'all to tell me how wrong I am. Looking forward to that. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And hey, if you're looking for the newest album reviews or the newest episode of Billboard Breakdown, links in the card right over there. Just keep in mind, I've also got a link for my Patreon over there, which I've rebooted in earnest for my new series. It's going to be starting up called On the Pulse, which will kind of collapse my album reviews into something new that I'm really looking forward to. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.
2 weeks and I'll be home.